So I'd like to begin our sermon today with a poem by Percy Shelley. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." So I first discovered that poem in a reader's theater class that I was in during my undergraduate days. And from the first moment I read it, I felt drawn to it. I think there's something very satisfying about this poem. Satisfying in knowing that, those who beat their chests, proclaiming to the world how great they art, eventually find that they too will fall, and someday the monuments they have built unto themselves will crumble and fall as well. I think that, many who find their way to the top of the heap find something in the words of an aging King Solomon to be true. This is from Ecclesiastes verses 2, 3, and 11. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Wow. Well, in our gospel lesson today, Jesus is giving his disciples what is more or less a play-by-play of what is about to happen. How he's going to be betrayed and handed over to the authorities, how he's going to be crucified and then raised from the dead. This is the second time that Jesus is predicting his death. And our gospel writer tells us that, this time, even though they didn't understand, even though the thought of this happening to Jesus likely terrified them, none of his disciples were going to speak up. Probably because the last time one did, you may remember Peter passionately telling Jesus, "No, surely this won't happen to you." Jesus' response was to call Peter Satan and to tell him to get back where he belonged. I imagine that none of the disciples were looking for a reprisal of that speech aimed at them. I wonder, though, what it must have been like to hear Jesus speak those words about all your worst fears coming true. I wonder what it must have been like to keep walking toward the cross, knowing that the end was near for the Jesus movement, at least as you knew it. I imagine it must have been sobering. I imagine the disciples would be worried for Jesus. I imagine that they would have been walking in a somber, contemplative silence. I imagine that for those who maybe were beginning to understand, just a little even, they may have been working out in their minds the meaning of a life of sacrifice, a life of service, a life dedicated to loving God's people who are hurting, people who society and culture had pushed to the margins, people who suffer the consequences simply of where they were born. or when they were born. Consequences of being born in the wrong place at the wrong time. At least, well, that's what I would imagine, knowing that Jesus was daily showing humanity by his example just how far God was willing to go to love the hurting people in this world. And somehow, by that example, Jesus was also showing us how far God has called us to go. I would hope the disciples were starting to figure that out, that they're called, and just as we're called, to love the people who are hurting in this world. However, that's not what was happening. Instead of doing any of the things that we would imagine or expect given the circumstances, we read that the disciples start arguing about which of them is the greatest. An Ozymandias moment, if ever there was one. And I think, wow, they're so dense. How can it be? And, well, then I remember all of the dense things that I have done and that I still do, and it suddenly doesn't seem so far-fetched. I think, though, that somehow, as we grow older, we at least I'll speak for me, I won't speak for any of you, because I know each and every one of you are perfect angels who are incredible. But me, on the other hand, I'm not so great, and as I get older, sometimes I get a little bit more, hard-headed, a little bit more stubborn. I think that's one of the miracles, of children. Being a father now, I'm experiencing this. I'm experiencing getting to watch my son express this pure, unfiltered, unmarred love. It's incredible. I mean, he will come up to you and hand you his half-chewed chicken nugget because he wants to share with you, because he wants to show you love. It's incredible. He doesn't know that it's half-chewed, and that's not something that you would do, but it's the thought that counts. Seeing the way that he expresses the love in his heart, it just, I don't know, it's just something, isn't it? I'd like us today, kind of with all of that in mind, to just take a moment. Close your eyes. No, really, close your eyes. I'll wait. Think back to when you were a child. Do you remember what it was like to want to help the people that you loved? Do you remember wanting to help with the chores or the dishes, or cheer someone up when they were sick, to take care of someone when they needed taken care of? You remember caring and helping the people that you loved and the way that felt? Okay, you can open your eyes. I think some of us maybe had to go way back before the brokenness of the world got in our way. But even if you can't remember, please trust me in knowing that there was a time when you loved so freely and so purely that it was on par with miracles. But then life gets in the way. We get disappointed by those whom we love, and over time we get jaded. I think even those of us who may have had the best of childhoods, eventually the pureness of our love and our intentions and our motives can sometimes be compromised by selfishness. How did we lose our way? But the real question, I think, is how do we find our way back? And then Jesus took a little child and put it among them. And taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and he put it among them. Wow. That's really something, isn't it? It's not what they expected at all, because I can tell you that in the first century, in that culture, children were more or less worthless. They couldn't work. They more or less ate and did not much, not anything that was productive anyway. So the idea that this child was the greatest would have been incredible for those disciples to hear. So I think to find our way back is simple. We need to remember what it's like to love in the same way that we did when we were children. And then we need to consciously decide to love people in that way, especially those people who are hurting the most in this world. You see, I believe that we are called to change lives and change the world and change the future by loving people in the present and helping them find a path where they will go forth and do the same. See, love, that's what changes lives. That's what changes the world. That's greatness. You can never know the impact that just a little love and kindness can have on people. I'm sure you've heard of the butterfly effect, and if you hadn't, it's the idea that a butterfly flaps its wings all the way around the world, and somehow the wind from that changes something, that changes something, that changes something, and then affects or has a massive effect on our lives. I like the idea of a love butterfly effect, don't you? But you know, the opposite's also true. When we're unloving, unwelcoming, when we're selfish, when we use our resources to build monuments to ourselves and walls to keep others out, these things also impact others. These things can also impact the way that people treat one another. But Jesus, through this non-violent love and sacrifice, has shown us how to break the cycle. And we should break the cycle, you see, because the selfish ways of the world, the ways that cause us to hurt others, are not the ways of life. And even those like Solomon, who reach the top by stepping on the backs of others, eventually find that, well, meaningless, all of these things. Because you see, Jesus taught us that the way to find our lives is by losing them. You know, Jesus said twice now, remember, that he was going to be handed over and crucified and rise on the third day. And we see in his life, death, and resurrection that this sacrificial giving for the good of others is the way of life, and somehow it works. See, Jesus rose from the grave and he turned this world upside down. Jesus showed us that a willingness to love, a willingness to be like a child, to be powerless, a willingness to advocate for others so much that you become the target of the aggression. That's not weakness, but it's strength. It's strength that's founded in a love that can move mountains. Love that comes through this desire to serve others. Love that comes through sacrifice. Love that's found in a willingness to follow Jesus' example. You see, I believe that Christianity in the West here has kind of been making a mistake for a while, and it's this idea that Jesus somehow came to change God's mind about people. But I don't think that. I think Jesus came to change people or humanity's mind about God and about each other. That changes things completely. It shows that God will go to any length to show not only his love for us, but also call us into the same love for one another. Because that's where life is found. That's where greatness is found. And I'm about to call it a day here, so I hope it hasn't been too long of a sermon. I'm convinced, though, you see, I'm I'm convinced that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is a testimony to a God of love. I'm convinced that the God of the universe loves each of us so much that he broke the mold of creation, became incarnate of the Virgin Mary, and came to show us what really matters in this world. I don't believe we're called to build monuments to ourselves, to our greatness, monuments that will someday crumble. I believe that we're called to live in such a way that people will be shocked at how we love others, and that love changes the world, not just today, but tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Amen.